Hello everybody, my name is Adele Robinson and I'm from Sheffield City Council. I'm here to say hello and welcome you to tonight's Vigil. As usual, we have a very full programme of passionate speakers from various communities in Sheffield, and they'll be speaking on the theme this year of ordinary people and on the importance of remembering those that were murdered in the Holocaust and subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. This year, we're also being privileged to work with the National Holocaust Centre and Museum, who have arranged for Ruth Schwiening, a Holocaust survivor and refugee, to visit Sheffield to give us her reflection. Ruth has also visited 2 schools today to speak to them. This year is the first vigil that we've had in person for 2 years, and it's great to be back in the Winter Gardens, even though it is a little bit colder than doing the vigil online. It's encouraging to see the amount of people that we've got here tonight, demonstrating, I think, our commitment as a community to recognising the importance of Holocaust Memorial Day. This evening we'll be following the programme that you've got on your chairs, and there is also a link and a live stream to this event which has been broadcast, and we also have British Sign interpreters available. We hope that you appreciate the readings this evening and use them as a focal point for your own reflection on how we can move together as a community free from discrimination and persecution. And can I first introduce our first speaker, who is the Right Worshipful, the Lord Mayor of Sheffield, Councillor Sioned Mayor Richards.
Good evening, everybody. Let's just short people. And welcome to our Holocaust Memorial Day Vigil 2023, the first in-person vigil since 2020. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us here this evening. Every year on the 27th of January, we come together as a city to remember those who suffered and died under the Nazi persecution during the Holocaust and the subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Darfur and Bosnia. This year's theme is ordinary people. So much has changed in our lives since the last in-person vigil in 2020, which took place just before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, we have lost many of our loved ones. This in-person vigil is part of the return to normality. There will be a time where others will learn about our experiences and truly understand that because of the kindness, care, compassion and help given by so many ordinary people doing extraordinary things, that the world pulled through a heartbreaking global pandemic. Genocide happens when ordinary people turn a blind eye, believe propaganda, join murderous regimes. People are persecuted, oppressed, and murdered in genocide simply because they are ordinary people who belong to a particular group. Ordinary people were involved in all aspects of the Holocaust, Nazi persecution of other groups, and in the genocides that have taken place more recently. Ordinary people were perpetrators, bystanders, rescuers, witnesses, and ordinary people were victims. And we know it doesn't have to be like this. During the Second World War, Denmark managed to evacuate 7,500 of its 8,000 Jews by sea to nearby neutral Sweden. The arrest and deportation of Danish Jews had been ordered, but the efforts to save them started earlier due to the plans being leaked. And it was a small boat's mission as hundreds of fishermen, ordinary people, helped to get their Jewish fellow citizens to safety. The rescue was considered one of the largest actions of collective resistance to aggression in the countries occupied by Germany during the Second World War. And as a result of the rescue, over 99% of Denmark's Jewish population survived. We also have the example of the Kindertransport. This was an organised rescue effort by train of children, but not their parents, from Nazi-controlled territory that took place during the 9 months prior to the outbreak of the Second World War and was supported by the British government. And these children were taken in by families, all ordinary families, ordinary people who made a difference. We are very privileged this evening to be joined by Ruth. Ruth arrived in England on the Kindertransport at the age of 3. And if any of you are parents here, you're imagining what your 3-year-old would have done, how you would have felt seeing off your child, not knowing if you'd see them again. The thought is too much to bear, and yet when you love your children, this is what you do. Ruth's father was imprisoned in Dachau, and her mother was left desperately trying to find a way out for the rest of the children. Ruth will reflect not only on her experiences, but of that of her parents, whose determination enabled the family to eventually come back together. This year's theme also prompts us to consider how ordinary people, such as ourselves, can play a bigger part than we might imagine in challenging prejudice today. This dreadful and inhumane period will never be forgotten. Sheffield will continue to raise awareness around the Holocaust and other genocides, encourage solidarity, act collectively against oppression, and express humanity and kindness to all. Sheffield became the first city of sanctuary in the UK, and we should feel incredibly proud to call this welcoming and vibrant city our home. We are truly committed in supporting those who have no choice but to flee their homes thousands of miles away to create a new life here with us all. Together, we move into what may be another challenging year ahead. Ordinary people can make a contribution towards a better world, so let's all vow to continue to be ordinary, extraordinary people together. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Shona. Can I now welcome the Council Leader, Councillor Terry Fox. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, my Lord Mayor, Deputy Lord Mayor, Mayor Coppard, as MPs, and ladies and gentlemen. There are not many times when you are a leader of a council that a number of events, sometimes with prickly conversations, sometimes with comments against you, or meetings that you sometimes don't want to go to. But certainly this is one that any politician, any member would want to be and speak to. This year's Holocaust Memorial Day theme, Ordinary People, is deeply thought-provoking, inspirational and reflective. Perpetrators were ordinary people. Victims of genocide were ordinary people. Rescuers We're ordinary people who did extraordinary things. And ordinary people were bystanders, who let the genocide just take place around them. We are all ordinary people, and ordinary people gathered here today. But we're all ordinary people who can be extraordinary in all our actions. We can all make decisions to challenge prejudice, stand up to hatred, to speak out against identity-based persecution. I'm grateful and appreciate that this year, unlike the past 2 years, we have been able to meet in person, to be together here in the Winter Gardens as we host the vigil in remembrance to those that suffered during the Holocaust and in other genocides around the globe. Whilst we meet in person, the changed world also means that some people, though unavailable to attend, will be able to watch this webcast this evening with real human spirit, remembrance and unity. We're all here today to renew our commitment in remembrance of the victims who faced unimaginable atrocities committed in the name of identity-based prejudice. As a global community, we are almost constantly reminded that a free world from oppression, hatred, racism, persecution is yet to be a reality. We must strive to learn from the past and apply our knowledge to our present in hope that one day the future will be brighter for all humanity, for all ordinary people. I am delighted, privileged and humbled that Sheffield has been able to welcome and host Holocaust survivor and refugee Ruth at today's vigil. Earlier today, Ruth spoke to over 500 young people from 4 secondary schools in the city with Arlo Mayor. The response to the immense challenges arising from the pandemic was driven by ordinary people who did extraordinary things with acts of kindness, support, determination, and protecting each other with compassion, togetherness. Community spirit shone through of every corner of the city, and who can remember clapping the way we did in support of those who were supporting us and our loved ones. As we move forward in 2023 with resilience, with determination and solidarity, to continue to protect those who are vulnerable, celebrating our differences, standing up to prejudice, it is ordinary people doing extraordinary things that will one day make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. And can I now welcome Ruth Schwiening, please? Schwiening, sorry.
Right. It is wonderful to be here and see you all. It makes me want to come and live in Sheffield, not in a small place like Market Bosworth. The community here seems so lovely, so interested. Anyway, I have a limited time in which to talk to you. Thank you. Yes, I've been since 9:30 on the road talking to various people, but I must say this venue is amazing and the audience as well is amazing. So let me start off, please, by introducing myself. My name is Ruth Schwiening, and I'm Jewish. I say that proudly because it was a long time, for a long time, I denied being Jewish. My father was born, and now my maiden name is Auerbach. Now I married a Schwiening. It's difficult to spell. Auerbach was difficult to spell for English people. I thought I'd be able to marry a Smith or so, but no, it came to a Schwiening at the end. My father, and I'm going to tell you a little story, if you bear with me. It's all right if I sit down. A little story about a family, a very ordinary family. Nobody exceptional in it at all, except it was extraordinary events that actually impacted from the Holocaust on their lives. My father was born in Reichenbach, a small place not far from Breslau. My mother was born in Breslau. My father studied agriculture. He wanted to be a doctor, but he didn't make the grade, and instead of that, he studied agriculture. My mother was a bookkeeper, very clever. In fact, I think I won't say this too loud, but I think a bit cleverer than my father. My father was a jovial man, and I think this is how he got through the trauma of his life. All they wanted to do was to live in Germany, live at peace. They loved each other very much. They wanted to get married. They wanted to live a life of peace and tranquility. They wanted to build their own farm and stay there in Germany for the rest of their lives. But this was not to be. Why? They committed no crime other than being Jewish. They built their farm and they were happy. Had 3 children, 2 boys and me, the girl, 2 boys to help on the farm and the girls to help make the beds. But that's what girls do, isn't it? Then what happened was that in 1933, Hitler, who had already decided in 1922, when he was in when he was in prison, decided to write a book, Mein Kampf. And there he spelt out quite plainly what he wanted to do. He wanted to get rid of all the Jews because the Jews defiled the Aryan blood, the Aryan race. And this is what he said already in the 1920s. It wasn't until 1933, as you probably all know, that he came to power. And at 1933, he decided, 1933 already, he decided that no Jew was to own land. No Jew was to be a farmer. They weren't worthy of it. So what did my parents do? They'd already built their farm, they were happy, they had 3 children, and here I must say, in order for you to understand later on, my mother had had polio as a child, and she was very disadvantaged with walking, and I think that is very important to remember when we think about her fate. 1933, then, they virtually had to give up the farm. They managed to stay there until 1936. Then it became clear to my parents that their existence had been taken away from them. What to do? They were driven out in a way of their farm. They had to sell it and they had to move once again. Move from the country they loved. They were first and foremost Germans. Later on, Jews. But the most important for them was to be in the country that they would have given up everything except their lives to stay in. They then decided that there was no other way. From 1933, Hitler came to power, and that is when the terrible things happened. And when I speak here, I'm not only speaking about or for my family, I'm speaking for thousands of families that were persecuted in many ways and forced to leave the country that they loved. Please remember that it is so many people whose lives were altered through the demonship of the Third Reich. They then decided no other way but to emigrate. They emigrated, but where to? No country really wanted them. After all, Hitler had made them out not to be people, but to be vermin, to be extinguished from life. They managed to get to Austria. And I must add that my parents never told me anything about my life and about their lives. My father had a sister, Frida, who at the age of 44, think of that, the age of 44, in the heyday of her life, she was transported to Theresienstadt, to a concentration camp. We don't know exactly how she died. I don't want to know. But we know that she was possibly killed. I also had two grandmothers who I never really saw. There was Henrietta Auerbach and my mother's mother as well. Good people, probably quite wealthy. When I look at the photograph of them, I see a lady standing there with jewellery, fine clothes, and the other one as well. But had they realised that one day they would be stripped of everything they owned, they would have to leave the flat, they would be put in a Judenhaus, they would be transported, not by limousine, by cattle truck, down to Theresienstadt and killed. Had they known that this was to be their future, they probably would have committed suicide, as many, many people did, because they saw the black clouds. Well, not clouds that were passing by, but clouds that were there forever. My father then decided, I'm having to shorten this because I'm aware of time, so I'm sorry if I shorten it. Later on, I hope you have the opportunity to ask one or two questions. And they went to Austria there, and my parents were happy for a time. For 2 years, from 1936, when they took their children, and my father took his incapacitated wife to start a new life. What happens? Then Germany moves into Austria. And what happened in Austria was exactly the same that happened in Germany. People were derided, people were thrown out, people were murdered in some way or other. For what reason? For no crime other than they were Jewish. Ordinary people murdered by ordinary people. One can hardly imagine it. And then they decided there was a Kristallnacht. 1938 was a Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. The night of the broken glass was the catalyst that changed their lives and the lives of many, many people. And they were then, the synagogues were burnt, the Torah was taken out of the ark and torn up, books were burnt, the music was burnt of Jews, and that was the sign that people realised they had to leave Germany if they could. One day, or one night rather, there was a knock on my father's door. And somebody that came at the door, and it was a member of the police. They knocked the door and said to my father, "Are you the Jew Auerbach?" My father said, "Yes." "Well, come with us immediately." And they loaded him onto a lorry. He did not have time. He did not have time to say goodbye to his children. He didn't have time to kiss his wife goodbye. His wife did not know where he was going. He probably didn't know himself where he was going. My brother, who was older than me, saw this happening, and later on he does recount a little bit about it. I may have told you already, my parents didn't tell me anything about the past. They didn't tell me anything about their parents. They didn't tell me anything about the house in Austria, and they didn't tell me anything that might have happened to me during my time in Austria. So I came over with like a blank sheet of paper. So my father's away in Dachau. He was only in Dachau for 6 weeks. You say 6 weeks. You think of 6 weeks. 6 weeks is no time at all, you think to yourself. But 6 weeks in a concentration camp where they flog you, where they made to stand in the appel on the courtyard for 24 hours, regardless of the weather, that can be a hell of a long time. My father managed to get out of Dachau with the assistance of my mother, who got him a visa, and he was let out after 6 weeks on the promise that he would leave Germany, Austria at that time. She got him a visa through queuing day and night and day. Visas aren't, we think it's just a piece of paper, you can sign it and that'll be it. She must have queued, and she, again, I remind you, she was handicapped. She was with 3 little children, and she queued and managed to get him a visa to England. England promised to accommodate a certain amount of people, and this is how he managed to get out of the concentration camp. In the meantime, when my father was in Dachau, the police or Klagenfurt officials issued a letter to my mother saying, "We want you out. You are to be evacuated. You are to leave your farm, take anybody who's Jewish with you, and go to Vienna." Her husband was in Dachau, and she had to think herself, what am I going to do? And she must have known that in Vienna, if she went to Vienna, that would be the end. Vienna was the hub of all Jewish people, and they mainly were transported east. And I think we know what that means. So she didn't go to Vienna. Somebody came, a neighbour came, and they were good Germans. A neighbour came to her and said, "Hilda, we will help you," from the Jewish organisation. They came, they were told by the Jewish organisation what was to happen. And they came and said, "We'll help you." My mother said, "Well, how?" And they said, "We will take one of your children. We can only take one child, and take her through the kinder transport and get her to England." Now, the kinder transport, I'm sure most of you will have heard this. It was a transport for 10,000 children to come to England and be fostered or to go into a home. And the Jewish organisation had to arrange this and make sure once the children got to the other end, they were safe, and they took on the authority of the missing parents. Now, you can imagine sending your child, I was only 3.5, sending your child away, not knowing whether you will ever see your child again. Please, try and imagine this. It is too hard for us to imagine. When I had 3 little children, 3 children of my own, I used to look at them and think, yes, this is what happened to me at your age. So I am in England through the help of the kinder transport. But before that, the organisation told my mother, "We can only help one of your children. You have 3 children. Which one is it to be?" Imagine that situation. You love your 3 children, you love one as much as the others. Which child do you send away, perhaps knowing that you will never see that child again? Think about the suitcase you may have to pack. What would you pack in that suitcase with this knowledge in mind? How would you act? I don't know. It's a hypothetical question that I haven't been able to answer myself. So I was sent to an orphanage in Berlin, where I stayed for a little time and then went with the orphanage on a train and went to Harwich, from there to the foster parents, which a Jewish organisation had found for me, and lived there for 16 months. My parents got together again, my father, with the help of my mother. Because she had a visa, she got a visa for him, he was released. And this goes to show, and I have to question myself quite often when I hear that Ukrainians are waiting for visas. I have to say to myself, visas aren't obtained immediately. It takes days, it may take months. In the meantime, people are dying. I think we have to remember that a piece of paper can decide whether you live or whether you die. It's as important as that. My father, I'm cutting the story short because I have to, my father actually then managed to come over, separate to my mother, on a visa which enabled him to work as a farm labourer. He'd already had 2 of his own farms. He conducted his own farms, and then he suddenly is given the position of a farm labourer. But that was the way that visas were actually obtained. And here I must mention the name Frank Foley, who organised and who worked in the British ambassadors in Berlin, and he signed thousands of visas because he noticed, he heard of the terrible situation the Jews were in, and he signed them to help and rescue the Jews. Then my mother came over with the 2 boys, with my 2 brothers. I was put in a very good foster home, and I think, memory is very fickle. It changes, and it's influenced. But I think I was probably, that time was the happiest time of my childhood. These foster parents loved me. They were Jewish people, and they loved me. They sent me to school. They showered me with gifts. In fact, my father said, "Little Ruth is being treated like a princess," which I was. I just finished the story, my own story, very quickly. Then my mother came one day. She managed to get to England. My father got a job as a not a farmer, but a farmer's help on the War Agricultural Committee. My mother worked in the gasworks. So then what happened was that after a time, my mother came to the foster home and saw me, and this was probably 16 months later, 14 months later, and said to me, as her natural child, "Ruth, give me a kiss," as a mother would want to do. And I turned to her, apparently, and said, "No, not my foster mother, my mummy says I am not to kiss strangers." Can you imagine how my mother felt at that time? Her own daughter telling her they are not to kiss strangers. Then there was a lot of noise and shouting. I have a letter from my foster sister explaining what happened, and my mother went away. I don't know whether I went with my mother or whether I came some other time, and we were together as a family again. My mother never, and I will resent her for this, she never wrote to my foster parents who loved me, who wanted to adopt me, but couldn't adopt me because my parents were still alive. They thought that my parents had been killed in the Holocaust, and therefore they wanted to adopt me. They loved me. The position between my own mother and myself was broken. I never got into the same relationship with them as I did as other children, other girls do with their mothers. We got together as a family, as a refugee family, and this is why I like to help, and I am duty-bound to help refugees from the Ukraine, refugees from Syria. This is my duty, and this is more or less what I live for, the purpose of my life. We got together, and then at the beginning of the war, my father was taken to the Isle of Man. He was interned. It was nothing special. All enemy aliens, as he was classed, lived in the Isle of Man. But it wasn't like a camp in Dachau. It wasn't a concentration camp. There he gave lectures. There he was happy, and he could live at peace. But the past was dead. The past for them was dead. They had to start again. I work in glass, and if a glass breaks, I put it back in the kiln, and it goes together again. But it's different. The picture's not the same. It's different. And their lives in England was different. They have made a happy life. 3 children. We have 3 children and 8 grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild, and it shows we the Jews are still here, regardless of what Hitler had intended for us. So I think I've almost overrun my time, and I have to finish that. There's a lot more to say, but time is short for everybody. And really, I could stay forever here in this beautiful surrounding, but I don't think I'll be allowed. So I would like, if I have a moment, I would also like to thank the Lord Mayor for the hospitality she's shown to me. And also, I would like to thank the Sheffield, is it the council, is that correct? For enabling me to come here and to talk to you all. Thank you so much. Thank you.
That's fine. Do you want to sit down?
Yeah, and you'll have to wander around because
that's
I'm
fine.
hungry. Okay.
Ruth would like to ask if anyone has any questions, and I'll take the microphone and ask. A little change to the agenda, but does anyone have any questions for Ruth?
Please don't be shy. I'm here to answer questions.
Okay. I'll call them in too.
Ruth, did you ever go back to Germany?
Yes.
And to your home city or town?
I went back to Germany. Do you know why? Can you guess why? I went back to Germany because I studied German at university. I'd lost German as my first language, and I studied German as really as a second language. And when you do that, you have to go into the country of the language you're learning. I went to Berlin to study, and what would happen, I was of the right age, I think, and I met Jürgen, who's sitting there, my future husband, my husband now of 67 years. Oh gosh, that seems a long time, doesn't it? And we got married. But with that, I have a little bit to say, is that when Jürgen came to England and I introduced him to the family and I said, we want to get married, my parents weren't very pleased because he was German and because they thought they would lose me to that country, a country where they had been thrown out. And what they said to me, right, okay, if you want to get married, but don't expect any member of the family to come and be at your wedding. I love my parents. So what do you do? What do you do? It was a dilemma for me. It was a dilemma for Jürgen. And what would you do? I'm asking the majority of you. I wonder if I can get any answer. Any answers? What would you do?
I would defy my parents.
You just...
I would defy my parents.
You defy your parents? Oh, you naughty girl. Okay. Yes, exactly what I did. I thought, well, if nobody from the family, no brothers, would come over, my parents wouldn't come over, then I will go over to Germany and I'll get married. And that is how I came over to Germany, got married in Germany. I can't say it was the happiest day of my life. First of all, it started at 8 o'clock in the morning. That was bad for me. But anyway, I got married there. Jürgen's parents weren't over-delighted. They had already been indoctrinated with the ideas that Jews are Jews and are Jews, thumbs down. But they did eventually accept me. They didn't particularly like me, but that may not have been because I'm Jewish. It may have been my own character, which they didn't like. I got on very well with Jürgen's father, not so very well with the mother, but it was a tolerable situation. And things improved no end when we had the children. We had the children, and this cemented the relationship between my parents, Jürgen, and the children. Children do wonders for marriage, sometimes. But there you go, and we actually got together and lived a very fortunate life. My love for animals has perhaps been inherited from my father. We have a small acreage, 8 acres of ground in Market Bosworth. I have ponies, I've had alpacas, or I always say we have, and various goats, sheep, etc., various animals. And so you can imagine we live and have lived an idyllic life. Only that I wish I could have had a happier relationship with my mother and a happier childhood. That's really all. I've got to finish now. My husband's giving me a sign. I'm talking too much.
We have one other question.
Another question, please.
It's not actually a question, it's actually to thank Ruth and the Jewish community, because I was fostered by a Jewish family when I was a child down south, and if it wasn't for their love, I wouldn't be the person I am today, and all the volunteering I did with all the different communities.
Thank you.
Can you just give me the gist of that? I'm sorry, I'm so hard of hearing, so sometimes I don't hear what my husband says.
It wasn't a question, she was just thanking the Jewish community because they had helped her when she was young. She went down south and had support. So she wanted...
Yes, the Jewish community have been invaluable. Not so much with me, but that they've lost me. They lost me. Although I say I'm Jewish, and I will say it, and I will never deny it, I don't eat kosher food. I don't go to the synagogue. I don't keep the Yom Kippur or the high holidays, but yet I feel very much of being Jewish because to deny it would be to deny everything my parents went through. So I will now stand up and with pride wear the Star of David, which indicates I am Jewish. Whether this is accepted by Orthodox Jews, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is that how I feel myself. Any more questions, please?
This is a rabbi speaking. I'll take your confession later. Ruth, what is your message for young people today?
Right. Looking around, the message was, what is my message? The question was, what is my message for the young people today? I suppose our dear rabbi means everybody who's here. The young people of today. The young people of today, I have a message that comes from the heart. And it comes from the heart saying, acknowledge the prejudices within us. Acknowledge all the prejudices within us and the wrongs that we may have done as far as that's concerned. And if we acknowledge it, if we can acknowledge it, then we can begin to treat it. We can begin to recognise it and to work at it and to say to ourselves, we can do without. We are open-minded, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of standing, social standing. We all are here together. And we will make, and especially the young people who are here with us, the burden in a way is upon their shoulders, and it's up to them to make the world a better place. So that is my message. I hope that... Any more urgent questions? Any more questions that perhaps... A little girl, when I gave a talk the other day, it was for Nottingham Trent University, the criminologists, and I gave this talk and they were all quiet and they were all shy to ask questions. And then at the end, this young lady, not little girl, came to me and she said, "Can you advise me? What should I do with my life? How can I improve with my feelings for other people? How can I lead a good life?" I was absolutely dumbfounded. I didn't know what to say. I'd never been asked this question before. And what can you say? I tried to advise her the same as I try to advise most young people. Recognise, deal with prejudice. Please, and you will have a happier life. We now, part of my life is taking in refugees from Syria to our homes, doing artwork with them. My children have hosted children, young people from the Ukraine who are living with them, and this is the kind of life we all ought to strive towards if we can. Perhaps. Yeah, well, if you want. Would you like to do that? Yeah, I understand I haven't got the timetable with me. I've just been told what's afterwards.
After we've had a few more speakers,
then
at the end we can then come back and people can ask you questions. We can have a question and answer at the end. Yeah. So if people have got any questions...
I'm sorry if I've taken space from other speakers.
You have not taken up any other space.
But I can ramble on too long. Okay.
You have not taken up any space.
Shall we go down?
We shall. Let me...
Whoops.
Yep.
I didn't see that. Standing up is too long. Right.
Thank you, Ruth. I'd just now like to welcome the Mayor of South Yorkshire, Oliver Coppard. Thank you.
I'm not quite sure how to how to follow Ruth, to be perfectly honest, but thank you, Ruth. As we've heard, the theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is ordinary people. My grandparents were ordinary people, Jewish people, but ordinary people. They fled Nazi persecution in Central Europe, attacked for who they were. This country took them in and gave them a home. Without that act, I would not be here today. My mum, here in the crowd, would not be here today either. I want to briefly tell my grandparents' story, a story in many ways that will be familiar to Ruth. My grandfather, Hans, was training to be a doctor in Vienna. When Germany occupied Austria, he fled to Prague. There he met and proposed to my grandmother, Ilse. He was not safe for long. As the Nazi regime marched into Czechoslovakia in early 1939, he fled for the UK just days ahead of the German tanks. When he arrived on this island, he managed to get a visa for my granny to join him too, on the bureaucratically romantic condition that they marry the moment that she got to England. By now, my grandmother was living under Nazi occupation. As a Jewish woman, she was not able to leave the country. She was smuggled across the border to Poland in an animal truck in the summer just before the Nazis invaded their next target. From there, in a journey that still echoes today, she boarded a small boat in the Baltic loaded with herring. In that cold, dark, nauseating hollow in the boat, Ilse had to hold her breath as the journey took her back into Nazi Germany itself via the Kiel Canal. For the rest of her life, she never liked herring. They left everything behind, their families, their friends, the lives they had mapped out, for safety. Given jobs as a farmhand and a carer, their lives changed for years, then decades. My grandfather Hans was never able to complete his medical studies, something he regretted for the rest of his life. But they knew they were the lucky ones. Over the past few years, my family have laid 2 Stolpersteine memorial stones, one in Vienna and one in Prague. One to commemorate my grandfather's family, the other my grandmother's. My great-aunt and great-grandfather, my granny sister and father, were murdered at Auschwitz in 1943. Bernhard and Katerina Sonnenschein, my grandfather's family, were murdered in Chemnitz. They were ordinary people. Across Europe, you will find 90,000 Stolpersteine, or stumbling stones. They have been laid since 1992 by another ordinary person, Gunther Demnig, a German activist. They are small brass plaques which replace the pavement bricks in front of the homes of the victims of the Holocaust. They are a reminder not just of the Holocaust, but its victims were ordinary people who walked the streets of Europe. Ordinary people who lived, played, argued, worked and celebrated in ordinary communities. The people responsible for the horrific crimes of genocide to this day are often ordinary people. Those fleeing discrimination and extermination are ordinary people. Those who commemorate them are ordinary people. But we should also remember the ordinary people who helped my family settle in this country. The people who were their friends, their neighbours, their champions, their allies, their bosses and their students. We should remember the ordinary people who helped them escape to this country, the ordinary people who stood up to the Nazis risking their own lives, the ordinary people who today stand up to intolerance and hate, because being passive is not a neutral action. We celebrate in film those who took action in the Second World War, like Oskar Schindler or Dietrich Bonhoeffer. But we should celebrate the ordinary people today who are still called to action. Someone like Joan Salter, herself a Holocaust survivor, who earlier this month challenged the dehumanising rhetoric aimed at those crossing the Channel on small boats today, or those in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, and across the world who have taken in Ukrainian families fleeing homes under attack. When we gather for events like this one, we say, never again. Never again should families like mine be ripped apart by racism. But never again does not mean we should forget the millions murdered simply because of their faith, their race, or their politics. Nor does it mean forgetting the heroism and bravery of those ordinary people of all faiths and none who stand up against hate and persecution. Edith Eger said, "Courage is a choice ordinary people continue to make." And as we yet again face a growing wave of anti-Semitism and intolerance across our country and across the world, that's the lesson I will take from this year's Holocaust Memorial Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver. Can I welcome now Professor Jane Ginsberg from the Reformed Jewish Congregation in Sheffield.
So thank you for inviting me to take part in this vigil. I'm a member of Seven Hills Shul, Sheffield's Reformed Jewish congregation, but I'm speaking tonight for myself. As a Jew, I acknowledge and honour the memory of those who died in genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, and too many other places. As a Jew, I acknowledge and honour the memory of those who were murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust who were not Jews, including elderly people, people with disabilities, Roma and Sinti, communists, homosexuals. I also acknowledge and honour those who survived and were or have been scarred physically or psychologically by genocide. But tonight, I honour in particular the memory of the only member of my Polish family to have survived the Holocaust, Chaya Rosenberg, who became Helen Rothstein when she emigrated to America and got married. We share a name because my Hebrew name is Chaya. It means life. Chaya was an ordinary woman. She was born in 1930 in a small town 35 miles northeast of Warsaw. The town was called Wyszków. I know her only from her memoir, in which she describes a visit in 1937 from her aunt and great-aunt who lived in London. That aunt was my great-grandmother Jane, for whom I'm named in English. In September 1939, the Nazis occupied Poland, and Chaya fled Wyszków with her parents Chaim and Feiga, her brother Moishe, and her sister Rivka. I name them so that we can remember them. In the village of Brzuza, they were sheltered for 3 years by an ordinary Polish Christian woman, Pani Molska, who saved Chaya's life. When the Nazis came to Brzuza hunting for Jews, Moishe and Rivka hid in the haystacks, but Pani Molska would put Chaya into a pail and lower her lovingly into her well until the Nazis had gone, and then she would wind her back up again. So Chaya was the only one in her family who was blonde with blue eyes, so, wearing a crucifix, she could pass for a Polish Christian. And on behalf of her family, she could smuggle food into the Jewish ghetto nearby. But in 1942, all the Jews had to go to the ghettos, and Chaya's father asked her to travel to Warsaw to obtain forced documents so the family could escape to Cuba or America, where his sisters lived. Chaya stayed with friends of Pani Molska's while she was waiting for the documents, but doing an errand for her hosts, she was kidnapped by 2 young thugs who recognized her from Brzuza and knew she was Jewish. They wanted to know who she was staying with in Warsaw so they could blackmail them. She didn't tell them, but after a while, as she wrote in her memoir, the kidnappers became pleased with themselves. They could still turn her into the Gestapo and get a reward. In their jubilation, they got drunk and fell asleep. And Chaya took the opportunity to jump out of an open window and escape. She couldn't go back to Pani Molska's friends, miserable with nowhere to go, no money, no papers, and no idea what to do next. She got on a trolley bus. And on the bus, she got talking to the third and the last of the 3 ordinary people whose memory I honour tonight. We don't know her name. Chaya told the woman sitting next to her that she wanted to study in Warsaw but had lost her documents. And the woman didn't realise that Chaya was Jewish and said, well, why don't you go back to your parish priest and get some replacement, get a replacement baptism certificate? And that's exactly what Chaya did. Pani Molska's niece, Helena, whom she'd often talked about, had lived close by. Chaya knew everything about her, her birthday, her parents, her school, her church, and she'd learned everything she needed to know about Christianity from Pani Molska, who was a devout Catholic. The village priest believed her, believed that Chaya was Helena, and gave her a baptism certificate. Back in Brzusza, Chaya's father advised her to try to make a life for herself independently. She was only 13. He gave her some money, she left, and she never saw her family again. They were all murdered in Brzusza. I wish I had time to tell you the rest of her story, but suffice to say she survived, she had children and grandchildren. I honour the memory of Chaya Rosenberg, who became Helen Rothstein, and the memory of those other ordinary people, Pani Molska and the nameless woman on the bus who saved her. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Can I now welcome Henry Fanshawe, please? And more. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello everyone, we're from Dronfield Henry Fanshawe School. I'm Lily Wade and I'm head girl at Dronfield Henry Fanshawe School. Holocaust Memorial Day brings us all together in remembering the precious lives which were lost, in the hope that there may be one day in the future with no genocide. It is important for the younger generation to be educated on our Holocaust Memorial Day in order to prevent genocide from thriving within our society, as we should all unite in showing no tolerance towards prejudice. Challenging prejudice is so important in our society, as no member should be targeted based on their protected characteristics. This should be embedded within schools so children can be educated on the severity of prejudice and how we, as a society, do not tolerate any signs of prejudice or discrimination. Tonight, I shall be reading 2 poems written by Bishar Vidargan, a Holocaust survivor who was an inmate for 20 months at Auschwitz-Birkenau. As the only one of her family who survived German-occupied Poland, her poems depict the experiences of camp inmates during the Holocaust. I shall now share 2 of her poems with you all. With the number on my arm. The number on my arm, tattooed on my skin, cannot be erased without or within. It is a constant reminder, and to those who don't believe, I'll tell them about it and pull up my sleeve. To some it is strange, but there is no shame. They gave me a number instead of my name. The number meant one thing: freedom was not mine, an unjust verdict, I'd committed no crime. The ultimate fear was the chimney's black smoke, the grim bitter fate of so many folk. But I have survived with dignity, reclaimed my own name and my own ID. But the number remains clear and straight. We are both free, I survived my fate. The sentence. Getting a number instead of my name, that was a source of deep, painful shame. But what was harder still to bear was when they shaved off all my hair. My head was covered in stubbly thorn. I was almost bald, completely shorn. My hair, my crown, my femininity, my hair, my own, that belonged to me. I looked in the window to see my reflection. What stared back at me was complete rejection. Who was that stranger? Strangers could be. Could that weird image really be me? They shaved us off to ward lice from our heads, and then they took the hair from mattresses, beds. By force against our will, heads were shaved. To humiliate more, we were truly enslaved. At last my hair began to grow, as in nature's way, a sign of hope, I might survive this living hell one day. As a society, we hope that one day in the future we will live without genocide and no lives will be sacrificed by inexcusable prejudice. Thank you.
At Dronfield Henry Fanshawe School, it would be naive of us to believe that our school is immune to discrimination. This is because discrimination happens everywhere, every day, and that includes our school. It can come in many forms, from verbal to physical, from online and face-to-face, to name a few. It can be aimed at anyone for any reason deemed out of the ordinary, from sex and gender, to disability, to race or culture, to sexuality and more. All of discrimination stems from a fear that has been built through generations and generations, but it can stop with us.
Like we said, Dronfield Henry Fanshawe School is not a place free from discrimination and hatred, but we have systems in place to not only educate students on discrimination, but also try to protect them from it. For example, we have several teams of staff whose job it is to help students in time of need and hardships. Of course, there is still more than we can do, but it is bigger than our school, it is bigger than this room, and it is far bigger than our community. It will take a worldwide effort to end discrimination, but together we can start to take steps towards real change.
Thank you very much to the Henry Fanshawe School. And next, can I welcome Teresa Rostas from the Roma community, please.
Good evening, everyone. What a great example of beautiful resistance. Ruth, thank you, and everyone else who has spoken before. I see this as a beautiful resistance, and despite everything what the society and what this world sometimes bring in our life, we need to stand up. And this month I've wrote weekly articles about ordinary people that I've met in Sheffield when I arrived here, since 2011. And those people are ordinary people who made brave decisions and brave choices to help me when I was low, to help me when I needed someone to tell me that it's going to pass. And just a simple word by saying, take it hour by hour, meant a lot to me. And maybe thanks to those words and thanks to Val, who said to me, this city needs you, when I didn't even have a job, is what got me where I am today. People like Mai, who paid for my childcare course, for me to become a tutor and go to uni. Those people helped me to get where I am today. We carry it with us. Whether it's culture, whether it's trauma, it's still within us. It's in our blood, it's in our DNA, it's within us. And that is why we are still fighting against discrimination, and we are trying to see whether we can have more compassion toward each other. I am from the Roma community, specifically a Gabo community, which is half Jewish, half Roma. We still have the traditional dresses, the language. My language has survived despite all the laws that existed in the world. It was prohibited to speak this language in different countries, in Spain. In Austria, 90% of my community has been assassinated. In the UK, it was legal to kill any Roma found under their territory. In Switzerland, it was the same. And we survived the longest history of slavery in the world, which was 500 years in Romania. That only stopped 165 years ago. It's still within us. It still shapes the way that we are seen in the world. We are the world's largest ethnic group in Europe, and having to face a lot of discrimination. I'm going to read some words, and I've added a couple of more which were written by my dear friend, lecturer Delia Grigore from University of Languages in Bucharest. And I'm inviting you to reflect on ways of how we can all play a part into educating ourselves, our children, and remind ourselves how important it is to invite historians, teachers, and educational systems to write the true history about everyone. Okay. Used to the bad treatments since they came to Romanian lands and in the world, Roma cry, Roma laugh, Roma live. However, beyond all this, the Roma survived the Holocaust, Transnistria, the longest slavery in the world. And for this, for all of this, they are just grateful to God. The old people who have returned are not upset. They just thank God that they have survived. They know it wasn't their fault, but they don't say it clear whose fault it was. Because a quarter of the Roma have survived, Roma people just wanted to forget and did not weep. So as not to burden the young people and let them live happily, the Roma did not tell the young people so that they did not cry. In order not to assume the true history, governments wanted to forget. We have looked for books, we have found a few. We have looked for photos, we have found even fewer. Because the Roma people did not matter, historians did not write. Because it was not written, our society, our people, our Roma, forgot and did not cry. For us, more terrible than suffering is forgetting suffering. Forgetting suffering is the second Holocaust. That is why we should cry. Why don't we cry? Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. And now for some music and a reflection from the Orthodox Jewish community, Rabbi Golem. Thank you.
Lord Mayor, civic and religious dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, ordinary people. To be honest, I don't much like this term, as in my experience, people are never ordinary. Every person, all of you sat here today, are all unique examples of the human race. You neither look the same, nor do you behave the same. Your brain has 86 billion neurons. The latest estimates for this number of stars in the Milky Way is somewhere between 200 and 400 billion. So any one of your brains is not far off from the entire universe. There's 50,000 miles of tubing in your body. You have experienced millions of events which shape the person you are, and no one else would have had the same. You have your likes and dislikes, your talents and failings. You are a product of your parents. You have your siblings, your friends, your relatives, your neighbors, your teachers, and so on. You are quite unique. No one like you has ever existed, and no one ever will. I repeat this whenever and wherever possible. I was in prison on Tuesday and told an inmate there the same thing. He may be there for a good reason, but he still has a purpose. What that is may take time to emerge. But so long as you woke up this morning, God still wants you in his world. As the song goes, I know I'll never find another you. Showing my age there a little bit. Imagine if there was somebody identical to you. Take me. Imagine there's another Rabbi Golem out there who's as knowledgeable as I am, as well-spoken as I am, as handsome as I am. The question would be, why do you need two? If he can do what I'm doing, let him do it. I'm going back to bed. But that question can only be asked from the perspective of purpose. This is an axiom of Jewish thinking. We are here by design, heavenly craftsmanship, and each of us is endowed with a godly spark we call a soul. This is a continuation of creation as described in Genesis of Genesis. Creation means purpose and fosters a sense of responsibility, rather than saying you are here simply as a product of random mutation. You are anything but ordinary. The Holocaust took the extraordinary and reduced it to ordinary. Prisoners in the death camps or concentration camps were reduced to ash or to numbers or had them tattooed on their arms. Humans were treated like animals and lived or died at the whim of someone who considered them ordinary rather than unique. When humanity can learn to value each person as irreplaceable, then perhaps we will cease the killing and each will reveal his or her godly purpose. Heaven is here on earth in you. Song I'm adapted. Some people wonder, others may say, whenever they see strangers passing their way, that they're different from me, so I can't let them be. They don't belong, so don't let them stay. But stop and befriend. You'll find in the end they're ordinary people and not unlike you. So greet them and smile and chat for a while. Respect them, be kindly, that's the right thing to do. There's a small piece of heaven in everyone's heart, a glorious gift from above. It will sparkle and shine if we each do our part, to reach out and touch it with love. Oh, there's a small piece of heaven in everyone's heart, a glorious gift from above. It will sparkle and shine if we each do our part, to reach out and touch it with love. With passions and fears, laughter or tears, those ordinary people have feelings like me. So next time you meet on a bus, train or street, remember this message. Look and you'll see there's a small piece of heaven in everyone's heart, a glorious gift from above. It will sparkle and shine if we each do our part, to reach out and touch it with love. There's a small piece of heaven in everyone's heart, glorious gift from above. It will sparkle and shine if we each do our part, to reach out and touch it, to reach out and touch it, to reach out and touch it with love. Right, it works. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Rabbi Gollum. And can I welcome to the stage the next speaker, who is Amina Blake from the Muslim community.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Lord Mayor. It's nice to see you again. And dignitaries and everybody who has come tonight. It's just amazing to see so many faces. Familiar and new friends as well, I hope. The world is full of stories, narratives. And we've heard narratives tonight, so many different amazing narratives. Each moment of each day, we live our own narratives. We're all building a narrative as we go along. Look around at the people, passing the people around you. I'm a big people watcher. I don't know about you. I love watching people and getting to know them just from their body language and the way they're holding themselves, the way they're dressed. The guy walking his dog, the lady getting her nails done, or the guy getting his nails done for that matter. The child dreaming in school. I was a dreamer in school. It used to get me into a lot of trouble. Each one is immersed in their own world with their own dreams, their own hopes, their own challenges, and their own history. One of my lecturers at university once said something that has stuck with me ever since. I did an English degree at Sheffield Hallam. I wasn't clever enough for uni, I'm afraid. I was a Hallam student. I absolutely loved it there. I stayed 10 years and did 3 degrees. Don't ask. But he used to say, we're all a product of history, of our personal history and experiences, the history of society, the history of those around us. We live in communities that may share histories that are sometimes similar to our own. The love of a good curry, for example, right? That's shared by everybody. But histories can also be very different. Different cultures, different likes and dislikes, different religions. When we look at the faces, the clothes, the outer shells of others who we don't know, the strangers who pass, they may show a history that may be different from our own. Sometimes that can feel alien, different, a little bit unsettling. It's then that we feel difference. It's then that bias and stereotypes can creep into even the most reasonable, ordinary person. Not a single one of us is immune to media manipulation, negative images, the slow dehumanization of that person whose shell may look different to our own. The ones who suffered and still suffer from oppression, racism, being labelled as other by ordinary people, the Jews in the Holocaust, the Uyghur Muslims in China, the American Indians, the list is endless. Each and every one of them has a narrative as communities and as individuals. Their narrative could have been changed if ordinary people, people like you and people like me, had simply listened, spoken and acted against media and political norms and narratives. You see, outer shells can become simply a symbol. The kippah, like the hijab, becomes a symbol. The person inside is no longer a person. Their narrative has been stolen. Those people, oppressed people, are us. Outer shells can hide broken hearts, which must be healed and protected, whether through a legacy of being voices who cannot speak a word, or helping those with lost narratives to speak out loud. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, told us, if you see something evil, then you should change it with your hands. And if you're unable to change with your hands, then at least try and change it with your words, with your voice. This is where we look at one another, my dear friends. Look at yourself and whisper one word, one small word. It can change. And that word is me. It's me. It's about my narrative, and it's about what I do about other people's narratives. My dear friends, it's easy to pass on the responsibility of change to others, to not get involved when we hear or see something happening to our fellow human beings that is wrong. But once we accept change begins with me, there are no boundaries and no limits to what we can all do. Let's change narratives by being a voice to those who perished during horrific historical events such as the Holocaust. Let's change current negative narratives by speaking out and acting to change them, whether that's what's right in front of you or whether that's in the world on a larger level. Let's shape future narratives by preventing Holocausts and genocides, by never allowing the seeds even to be sown. Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. And next, can I welcome Heather Patterson from the LGBT plus community.
Thank you. I'm the Chief Exec of Civic, Sheffield's LGBTQ plus youth charity. And I'm going to read a piece of writing by Andrea Carlo. We saw barracks surrounded by a double circle of high fences. A torrent of blows awaited us. We were instantly overcome with terror. With these words in his 1994 memoir, Pierre Seal, one of the few gay Holocaust survivors to publicly share his experience, described his arrival at the Schermerhorbrug concentration camp on May the 13th, 1941, having been arrested on account of his homosexuality in Nazi-occupied France. Seal was interrogated, tortured, and forced to watch his lover being mauled by a pack of dogs, all before he'd even turned 18. 80 years later, while Holocaust remembrance has become an integral part of our civic duties, stories like those of Seal and other LGBTQ plus victims are often missing from that collective memory. This, however, isn't the consequence of an accidental historical oversight. The truth is that for the queer survivors of Nazi oppression, 1945 did not bring about any kind of liberation. Rather, it marked the beginning of a systematic process of persecution and willful suppression, one that would result in their erasure from the pages of popular history. Within the National Socialist vision, homosexuality represented an insidious threat to the Aryan race's survival that needed to be stamped out. Although male homosexual activity had been technically illegal in Germany since the 19th century, it was generally tolerated and even celebrated within certain urban circles prior to Adolf Hitler's ascension to power in 1933. Weimar-era Berlin came to be labelled as the gay capital of the world, a city where a booming queer nightlife scene was wedded with the budding dissemination of new academic ideas calling for greater acceptance of homosexuality and gender nonconformity. Realising the power these movements held, the Nazis began their anti-gay purges by immediately targeting the very hubs of queer cultural production and kinship, namely clubs, societies, and Magnus Hirschfeld's renowned Sexology Research Institute. Decades of pioneering work and community life had been erased, thus depriving queer Germans of their sources of solidarity both during and after the Third Reich. By 1935, paragraph 175 of the German Penal Code, the existing Prussian-era provision outlawing sodomy, was revised to include a harsher sentence and to criminalise virtually any kind of male same-sex intimacy. These Nazi-era modifications would amount to a death sentence for gay men, and haunt them for years to come. Under paragraph 175's aegis, police forces arrested approximately 100,000 gay men before the war came to an end, of whom 10 to 15,000 were sent to concentration camps. There, they were subjected to barbaric tortures, including sexual abuse, castration, medical experiments, and were further ostracised by fellow inmates. Overall prospects for gay prisoners were poor. An estimated 65% died, and an unknown, albeit likely disproportionate number, committed suicide. But tragically, gay Holocaust survivors did not leave their camps as recognised victims. Instead, even after liberation, they left as convicted criminals. The Nazi-era amendments to paragraph 175 were maintained for over 2 decades in West Germany, resulting in the arrest of around 100,000 gay men between 1945 and 1969, with some Holocaust survivors even being forced to carry out their sentences in prison. While East Germany had softer penalties, no reparations were provided for gay victims, and paragraph 175 itself would only be entirely removed from the penal code in 1994, following Germany's reunification. With time, we've come to learn about the pink triangles used by the Nazis to identify homosexual camp inmates, but not of the pink lists of gay men's names, lists that were also compiled by West German officials. Facing widespread homophobia and cut off from support networks which the Nazis themselves had destroyed, gay Holocaust survivors stayed silent out of fear of social and legal repercussions. Even in France, where homosexual activity was technically legal, Pierre Seal hid his story for years behind an unhappy marriage with horrific consequences for his mental health. I'd hear him screaming at night during my childhood, his son Antoine told me. He suffered more than I could fathom, more than I could comprehend. Not all of those close to Pierre were so understanding, however. He was disowned by his godfather and repeatedly sent letters from devoutly Catholic relatives calling for his conversion. The burden of such forced silence shackled the academic world, which was slow to acknowledge the Third Reich's queer victims. Indeed, one of the earliest definitive studies of the Holocaust, William L. Scherer's 1,245-page The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, published in 1960, left out any reference to the Nazis' anti-gay purges. All of this doesn't even begin to address the Nazi-era repression of queer women and intersex individuals whose experiences have been overshadowed by the double layer of homophobia and sexism. Lesbian women, for instance, may not have been systematically persecuted under the Third Reich, as paragraph 175 only targeted gay men, but that did not deter the Nazis from shutting down their clubs or for arresting them for antisociality. Scholars know of 2 women, L.A. Schmuller and Margaret Rosenberg, whose sexual activities were deemed morally unsound by the Gestapo, leading to their deportation and demarcation as lesbian political dissidents. While Rosenberg survived, Schmuller died of unexplained causes at Ravensbrück camp in 1943. It was not until the 1970s that gay Holocaust victims would start speaking out and receiving public acknowledgement, with the first testimony coming from Joseph Kohaus in 1972, followed by Pierre Seal's own memoir published in 1994. Advocacy groups successfully rallied for the creation of memorials, and the German Bundestag finally voted to pardon and compensate the victims of paragraph 175 in 2017. But a meagre and all too late offer of justice did not translate into universal recognition. For years, LGBTQ+ organisations were ignored and even shunned from Holocaust commemorations. We will physically oppose ourselves, if necessary, to a presence we deem inappropriate with the words used by a French partisan group in response to the participation of LGBTQ associations at a Holocaust memorial event, as recounted by activist Danielle Mesmack in 2001. The suppression of the Holocaust's gay voices remains a stain that lingers on to this day. It is vital that any form of modern-day remembrance includes their stories, especially as the LGBTQ community continues to face widespread persecution. With the last known Holocaust survivor tried for homosexuality, Rudolf Brazda, having died 10 years ago, it is now incumbent upon us to carry the torch of this lost generation, lest we too end up becoming complicit in its erasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Can I now welcome two people from Sheffield Voices onto the stage? Three people.
Just to be clear, we're not magic hands. We are Sheffield Voices, who are part of Disability Sheffield. So it makes us sound like a cleaning company, which we definitely are not. So, Robert.
That's me, the superstar. Go.
Just say we're Sheffield Voices.
Oops. Oops. Never mind. I'll try that again. We are Sheffield Voices.
We are a self-advocacy group for people with learning disabilities and autism.
Fantastic.
And our motto is bringing voices together, making things more... Thank you, Catherine. Bringing voices together, making things easier for everybody so that everybody can have equal rights in the world and in Sheffield. So, sorry guys, I've only just practiced this on the way down, so bear with me. At Sheffield Voices, we strongly believe in using our voices and uplifting the voices of marginalised people in our communities to tackle hatred and discrimination and fight for change. We are honoured to be here today to remember the victims and survivors of the Holocaust and subsequent genocide in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur.
As you all know, the theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial is ordinary people. And as we reflect on this theme and think about ordinary people that have perpetuated genocide, the ordinary people who were bystanders to these atrocities, and the ordinary people who were persecuted, I cannot help but reflect on the ways in which identity-based hatred and violence is still upheld by ordinary people in society today.
Disabled people, however, often do not have the privilege of being seen as ordinary people. Instead, we are othered, our voices overlooked, and our lives often seen as expendable. This already existing crisis of inequality has only been exacerbated by the pandemic. for economical harm and public debate on the value of our lives ensured a steep rise in disability hate crimes. The harrowing statistics have continued to grow. In the last year alone, disability hate crime has risen by 43%. Official figures show that sexual violence against disabled women in England and Wales more doubled between 2015 and 2021. Yet overall, prosecution rate for this type of crime has sharply decreased since 2016-2017.
Disabled women are also more likely to experience domestic abuse. According to the ONS figures in 2018, 16.8% of disabled women are subject to domestic abuse, compared to 6.3% of non-disabled women. Yet there is a shortage of support due to cuts to the funding of these vital services, and a BBC investigation in 2018 found that just 1 in 10 domestic violence refuge spaces in the UK is accessible to disabled people with impairments.
Over the 10 years' worth of dramatic cuts to social care and disability services and discrimination policies such as the bedroom tax have left disabled people amongst the hardest hit by austerity. Thank you, Catherine. Almost half of those in poverty, 6.8 million people, are from families in which someone is disabled. According to the research published in 2021, the loss of social care funding caused 23,662 additional deaths from 2010 to 2015. It is likely this trend has continued as the cuts have only worsened since this time.
Ordinary people are making these decisions, and ordinary people are looking the other way instead of challenging hatred on an individual and systemic level. On the other hand, there are also many incredible ordinary people that are committing to fight injustices and work towards a better future for everybody. And I'm sure that everyone here today can name at least one person they know who has done something extraordinary to make this world a better place. All forms of oppression can be challenged by ordinary people. Together we can work together towards a fairer and equal society where no one is silenced, where no one doesn't have a voice, and not one single person, no matter how ordinary or extraordinary, is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Since 9 o'clock in the morning, I've given a couple of talks. We seem to have had 4 venues to go to, and now I think we have to go home. So we are terribly cold, terribly hungry, but in spite of that, we have really enjoyed this meeting and meeting you. And one day, maybe we can come and live in Sheffield. But we won't leave it too long. Thank you. I was hoping perhaps to be able to talk to a couple of people around, but my husband thinks it's time for me to go to bed and have some food. So thank you again. I am if you are interested, please look on YouTube. Yes, look on YouTube if you know what that is. I've only just learnt what it is. And you will see the story, Ruth's story of art. Ruth's story. And you'll find it on YouTube. And we are also available from we talk at the Bet Shalom, and now it is time to say farewell. As much as I'd like to stay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. And over to
Wrong way, Ruth. I had the privilege of an hour sitting eating cake with Ruth in the mayor's parlour, and that still wasn't enough. Right, if you've all got your programme, on the back page is the United Nations Statement of Commitment, which we're all going to read together. So I will start, and everybody please join in. We recognise that the Holocaust shook the foundations of modern civilization. Its unprecedented character and horror will always hold universal meaning. We believe the Holocaust must have a permanent place in our nation's collective memory. We honour the survivors still with us and reaffirm our shared goals of mutual understanding and justice. We must make sure that future generations understand the causes of the Holocaust and reflect upon its consequences. We vow to remember the victims of Nazi persecution and of all genocide. We value the sacrifices of those who have risked their lives to protect or rescue victims as a touchstone of the human capacity for good in the face of evil. We recognise that humanity is still scarred by the belief that race, religion, disability, or sexuality makes some people's lives worth less than others. Genocide, anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, and discrimination still continue. We have a shared responsibility to fight those evils. We pledge to strengthen our efforts to promote education and research about the Holocaust and other genocide. We will do our utmost to make sure that the lessons of such events are fully learned. We will continue to encourage Holocaust remembrance by holding an annual UK Holocaust Memorial Day. We condemn the evils of prejudice, discrimination, and racism. We value a free, tolerant, and democratic society. Thank you. And I will now ask Father Grant Taylor to lead us in a minute of silence.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, distinguished guests, dear friends and citizens of Sheffield. What a great honour it is to be here tonight and to reflect together on these ordinary people who were also extraordinary people, and one of the extraordinary souls that we've heard and been blessed by tonight. I want to give you a book recommendation. At the moment I'm reading Jonathan Friedland's book, The Escape Artist, which follows Walter Rosenberg's extraordinary escape from Auschwitz and how in his spirit he was determined to save other Jewish people from the terrible fate that was meted out, not by evil people that we might draw in our head, but by people who started out as ordinary people, just like you and me. We must recommit ourselves in our own day and age to fight evil. It's not good enough just to try to be good or to believe that we are not evil people, but we must be people who are opposed to evil wherever we encounter it. In 1941, a Polish priest, Father Maximilian Kolbe, seeing the evil around him in Auschwitz, where he too had been imprisoned, stood out against those who were about to be murdered by the Nazis. 7 Jews had been selected in order to be murdered on that day, and he stood out and said that he would be murdered in place of one of them. He died by a lethal injection of carbolic acid, and yet it was Maximilian Kolbe who said that the worst poison of our own day is indifference. Let us then, my brothers and sisters, citizens of Sheffield, no longer be indifferent to intolerance or hatred of any kind. Let us remember all those who died amidst the evil of the Holocaust. Let us give thanks for all those who survived, and let us pray never again. I ask you if you are able now to stand for our minute's silence. And I conclude with the prayer of the Chief Rabbi, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Senior Imam. Loving God, we come to you with a heavy heart, remembering the 6 million Jewish souls and others murdered during the Holocaust. In the horrors of that history, when so many groups were targeted because of their identity, and in genocides which followed, we recognize destructive prejudices that drive people apart. Forgive us when we give space to fear, negativity and hatred of others simply because they are different from us. In the light of God, we see everyone as equally precious manifestations of the divine and can know the courage to face the darkness. Through our prayers and actions, help us to stand together with those who are suffering so that light may banish all darkness, love will prevail over hate, and good will triumph over evil. Amen.
I just want to thank you all again for coming and for participating and for sitting in this very cold place. A small piece of suffering in order to remember a large horror. Thank you all so much.